Hey guys, it's Scott from Axelboy again, continuing our off-roading 101 series. In this part today, what we're going to talk about is one of my favorites, and that's axles, gears, and differentials. So drive axles is one of the cornerstones that our entire off-road build is going to circle around. This is going to be the piece. This is what the tires are going to bolt to. This is what's going to get the torque down to the ground. This is what's going to make sure that each wheel gets equal amounts of power, we hope, when we're over an obstacle. The job of the axle is to support the weight of the vehicle in general and to deliver the torque down to the wheels, to deliver that power to turn the wheels to get you up and over that obstacle. Inside that differential, we're going to have a set of high point gears, otherwise called a ring and pinion, if you will. This is welded together for display purposes, but you get the idea. This is how they sit in there. And this is what we consider our final drive ratio. Inside that differential is a set of high point gears. And we'll often hear those referred to as 321s, 373s, 456s. And what this has given us is a ratio. And when we think of this, we need to think of turns of the drive shaft versus turns of the wheel. So if we have 373s, if you will, what that means is 3.73 turns of the drive shaft to 1 turn of the wheel. Consequently, 456s would be 4.56 turns of the drive shaft to 1 turn of the wheel. Now what this is going to equate to is what RPM is our engine running at as we're driving down the road. If we numerically go higher on our gear ratio, the engine RPMs are going to be higher per mile per hour. This is important because our engines don't just make power everywhere. They're getting better, but they don't just make power everywhere. That means we need to have the weight of the vehicle, the size of the tire, the speed that we're traveling, and the power band of the engine all lined up. Once we put bigger tires on, we increase the circumference. All of the sudden, that vehicle is traveling further with less turns. What that means is that our engine RPMs go down out of their power band. And what we start noticing is when we get on those hilly highway climbs and things like that, going up the mountainside, we're in and out of overdrive, downshift, downshift, downshift. It just never stops. I've got power, I don't have power, downshift. Fuel economy can't get any worse in that situation. It's annoying. You can't pull a trailer. You can't load it up with heavy gear. The only way that we're going to solve this issue is by changing the final drive gear ratio. People will ask me all the time, I just put bigger tires on my truck. I don't have any power. I can't pull the hills like I used to be able to. Should I get a programmer? Should I get a cold air intake? In my opinion, dollar for dollar spent, if you just lifted your vehicle and you're trying to get the power back, dollar for dollar spent, it's always going to be the final drive ratio that's going to make the difference for you. So how do you figure out what that ratio is going to be? Well, there's a math equation for that. One of the simplest ways to do it is to count the teeth. Okay, this is our driving gear. This is our driven gear. Okay, driven divided by drive is how we get this math. Okay, so here we probably are stamped on this one. This is a 513. If we count all of these teeth, divide the driven by the drive, our math is going to get us to 5.13 turns. That equates into 5.13 turns of the drive shaft to every 1 turn of the ring gear, the axle assemblies, and the wheel and tire assemblies. We can take that math further, figure out the circumference of our tire, and figure out how far the vehicle travels in that 1 revolution as well. Keep in mind, you've got gear reduction in the different transmission gears. Usually your 3rd, 4th gear is going to be 1-to-1, and then you're going to get into overdrive ratios. Now you need to take into account which gear you're in when you're trying to do your mile per hour calculations. Online, there's a lot of calculators that make it really easy for us. I just ask that you work with real numbers. Measure the height of your tire, know your ring and pinion ratio, know your transmission ratios, and then figure your RPMs. Another piece to talk about is the differential. Now the word itself means or implies that we need the ability to turn the outside and the inside tire at different speeds throughout a turn. Otherwise, they're going to scuff. So your salesman sold you a 4-wheel drive, but really, unless you bought a Rubicon, you probably got a 2-wheel drive. What I mean by that when I say that you probably have a two-wheel drive, I mean that the power will transmit to the path of least resistance. So if we were to pick a tire up in the air, or we had one tire on ice and we had one tire on concrete, we're gonna spin the tire that's easiest to spin. Sometimes we'll get in a situation on a trail where we have very little weight on one front tire, very little weight on one rear tire. We're always gonna spin that tire with low traction, and we're never gonna wanna transmit the power down to the tire that has the traction. And that's just the nature of the beast. So what happens is that one tire picks up in the air, the engine starts to spin it freely, forward motion stops, and then you're stuck. So in this video, we can see, unfortunately, it's an imported Toyota, sorry, but that video does make a great point. You'll see that when this vehicle gets up on the obstacle, the tire picks up off the ground, it starts to spin freely, and the vehicle loses forward motion and has to back down the hill. One of the ways that the manufacturers will combat this is sometimes you can have what's called a limited slip differential. Now, this is going to use a set of clutches or a set of helical gears to try to transmit power to both tires. Problem is that it takes about 500 foot-pounds of torque to slip those clutches. So by the time we get all the weight on one wheel, we're well over that 500 foot-pounds of torque, and we'll still spin that tire up in the air. Now, it's going to be good in the mud, it's going to be good in the snow, and any of that real super slick stuff, you're going to spin both tires. So it is an improvement. But in terms of off-road crawling, when we might be lifting a tire up in the air or have all the weight on just one tire, we're probably not going to get it done with a limited slip. In this video, we can see the same exact style of vehicle that's outfitted the same way as the open differential. This one is equipped with locking differentials, and you can see that as it approaches the obstacle, it can go at it at a slow speed and it can crawl. Not a single tire spins, even though one comes up in the air. They all four turn at the same exact speed. What this does is it gives us control, it gives us safety, it minimizes erosion, it keeps us from tearing up the course, and it keeps us in control. When we start talking about locking differentials, there's two different styles. The first one is a mechanical locker, and this is going to be like your Detroit Easy locker or your Yukon Grizzly locker, perhaps your PowerTrax Lockrite. With this style, we've got dog-eared teeth. I have an example of a mechanical locker here. This is a PowerTrax no slip. This goes inside in place of what's called the spider gears inside of your stock differential. And as you can see, it has really coarse square cut teeth that have little dog ears cut into them. These mesh up. Now there's a set of springs that press this together. When we get to the part where one wheel needs to turn at a different speed, we actually have to ramp and dislodge and allow those teeth to spin. Here I have a similar differential that's installed, and we can see that when we start to turn it at a different speed, this is the type of noise that you'll typically hear when one's turning at different speeds, such as a slow parking lot maneuver or really tight turns. Now, there has to be a certain amount of slop to allow it to ramp up and disengage. So what we find is we're going to have better than a 1/4 inch of rotation. Now by the time we get out on our 35-inch tire, what's going to happen is we put this thing in park and it's going to feel like it keeps rolling. And that's simply because it's traveling so far to allow that slop in order for it to work properly. And again, you can really hear the type of noise and how aggressive this is. Now the problem is those square cut teeth are spinning like that. If you're going around a turn, the second you step on the throttle, it jams back out together and it locks up. We generally are not going to recommend any mechanical lockers for road usage, especially not on a daily driver. The other style of locker I like to talk about is a selectable locker. And this is commonly called an air locker or an e-locker, possibly a aux locker as well. This type of locker is going to operate exactly the same as your open differential. Selectable lockers are going to be commonly called e-locker, air locker. The air lockers use air pressure to engage. The e-locker uses a magnetic ring to apply magnetic force to draw over a locking plate. This type of differential is going to operate the same way that your open differential does when you're on the road, but a simple flip of the switch and we're going to lock both wheels together. This gives us control, so we have no side effects when we don't want them. But when we need that extra traction, a quick flip of the switch, our axles are locked together, all four wheels are going to spin at the exact same speed. One common thing that I hear all the time off-roading is, I don't need lockers, I know how to use my skinny pedal. And while that's true, momentum is what they're talking about, and that's coming at your obstacle with enough speed to keep yourself moving through it. While momentum can get us through an obstacle, it's sloppy, it's loose, and it's a little bit reckless. We're not in full control. One bad bounce and it could get ugly really fast. If we have a mechanical locker and we're able to crawl it with zero or no or little tire spin, we're in complete control. We're not going to tear up the ground, we're not going to tear up our vehicle, and we're going to be in much more control. It's going to be much more predictable. An example, we have the same two type vehicles, one's going at it with open differentials and momentum, and we can hear it. We can hear it bottom out and bang as it hits. And then when we watch the lock differentials go, same vehicle, same tires, no tire spin, very slow, very controlled. We're going to be protecting our investment. One important thing that I'd like you to avoid, and I'm going to demonstrate it in this video, is once the tires start spinning freely or a tire comes off the ground and starts spinning, we really need to get out of the throttle. It's any time that we have high wheel spin and sudden gain of traction that parts break. And that's how we break axles and differentials. We want to avoid that, and we want to avoid any bouncing or hopping once we gain traction. And these are things that we want you to avoid. My personal choice for any of the street-driven vehicles or the dual-purpose rigs is going to be a selectable locker. This one happens to be a Yukon zip locker. There's several other brands out there. There's ARB, the original air locking differential. That's one of our favorites. Another favorite that we have is the Eaton E-Locker. And then Auburn Gear has their ECTED electrical lockers. So the two different major styles that we like are going to be the air locking differentials or the electrical locking differentials. There is a mechanical selectable differential that's called the Ox Locker. It's kind of been on the market, off the market a few times. It uses a shift fork. It's an innovative idea, but the parts availability and stuff has been such that we haven't found it to be a viable piece to recommend to our clients. So we kind of prefer the ARB and the Eaton and the Auburn products. Now, the way these differentials work is that it's an open differential, just like stock when you're driving around, until you want it to lock. You flip a switch, boom, it's locked together. If the wheels are turning at different speeds, you broke something. As soon as you turn it back off, you're back again to being an open differential. So the air locking differentials have an internal piston. So what happens is you apply the air pressure, and then the lock mechanism pushes over and engages a set of teeth in here up against the plate. When that happens, everything is locked. When you release the air, that plate springs back, and then we're back to open. Pretty reliable. Downside being we've got some O-rings and some piston seals that can wear over time, so it can require a little bit more maintenance. The E-locking differentials use a magnetic reluctor that pulls over that plate, and that's what locks it together. We found these to be extremely reliable in terms of engagement, but not quite as reliable in terms of brute strength. So if you're looking for a locker that's not going to break very often, that's going to just be able to take mass amounts of abuse, we kind of lean towards the air locking differentials. If you're looking for something for a milder rig, maybe a traveling rig or a hunting, camping, fishing type overlanding rig, then we kind of like the E-locker because we're not going to be beating on that rig quite as hard, and we want it to lock when we tell it to lock. Another piece that I like to talk about in terms of keeping these things alive, in terms of keeping the differentials and axle shafts and gears from breaking, I like to talk about some driving styles. One of them is limiting wheel speed. So we hear a lot of people on the trails that'll say, oh, I don't need a locker. I know how to use the skinny pedal. I know how to use momentum. And yes, many times momentum is the answer. And yes, momentum often will get you over or through the obstacle. But what we're not thinking about is the damage that we're doing to the track. We need to be able to keep our trails open. We need to keep them from being destroyed so everybody can get through them. We're not thinking about the uncontrolled slide and the damage we could take onto our vehicle by slamming through an obstacle real hard. And the other thing we're not taking into account is that high wheel spin. One of the things that breaks differentials the most is when we're spinning a wheel, getting over an obstacle, and all of a sudden we grab traction and everything comes to a halt. And then a 5,000 or 6,000 pound vehicle completely stops it from turning. And then the metal has no choice but to give and break. We want to eliminate wheel spin and control wheel spin as much as possible. Having a locking differential gives us the ability to do the obstacles at a slow speed with very little to no tire spin at all in most situations. So these are the most common topics and the most common questions that we get about axles, gears, differentials, and lockers. If you have any other questions, certainly look us up on the web, axleboy.com, on Facebook, on Instagram. Send us a message, give us a call, and we'll be happy to walk you through the process and talk about the different differentials and how you're going to use your rig and what some of your best choices might be.